what you've done is wrong. You've taken away a very young life for no good reason. Why? Why, Rachel? Why then?
A beautiful mum bludgeoned to death in her own home. And a supposedly devastated husband with a strange taste for the limelight.
He courted the media from day one, portraying himself as the victim.
Grieving partner or brazen liar?
What did she do, in your opinion, to deserve this?
I think he had a game plan in his head. I think he thought he was being clever, for sure.
Are you going to do it again?
This is somebody who is trying too hard to be convincing.
If you are, you need help.
This is somebody who doesn't know when to just shut their heck up.
With me tonight, Rachel's husband Joe and her mother Rose. You're very welcome.
From news bulletins to live chat shows, Joe O'Reilly appealed for help in catching whoever murdered his wife Rachel. But were the clues to his own guilt there all along? The Watcher.
If it was just a random burglary, it was it's somebody she wouldn't know, and after a few blows to the head, probably wouldn't recognise.
If we look at his hands, he's reliving the moment where he was actually in the bedroom, he saw it happen, and he was doing the hitting.
The Listener.
The majority of the blows that I saw were to the back of the head and around the back of the ear.
Why is he talking about blows, and why is he talking about seeing them? Is it a verbal slip that puts him at the scene?
And the Profiler.
There was a lot of blood, so therefore there would have been a lot of blood on this person.
I think everybody in the audience is feeling uneasy. So if this was a PR stunt, it was one that backfired massively.
A brutal crime that stunned and gripped a nation.
But why kill her?
Wow. We've got all these indicators clustering within about 5 seconds that make him prime suspect number one.
Paris, a city for romance and, especially, young lovers. In the spring of 1994, it was the destination for two Dubliners, 21-year-old Joe O'Reilly and Rachel Callaley, then just 20.
Rachel was one of 5 children. She had been adopted, and she was bubbly, bright, gorgeous. And then Joe was the second eldest of 4 children. After leaving school, they both wound up working in Arnott's, which is a huge department store here. And that's where Joe first spotted Rachel. So he chased her, really, for a while. He found out that she played softball as a hobby, and he went to a couple of practices in order to meet her, and got a date. And they were together from then, and he proposed to Rachel on the top of the Eiffel Tower.
The couple married in April 1997. By 2002, they had 2 young sons, and, thanks to his senior job with an advertising company, enough money to buy their dream bungalow in the Knoll, a quiet village 20 miles north of Dublin.
I guess they became more affluent. Things were turning out well for them, I suppose, as Rachel had hoped. And yeah, moving out of a sprawling estate to the idyllic rural kind of setting was what she'd always hoped for. And I guess to people on the outside, it would have looked as though they had a really good life together.
1:10 p.m, October the 4th, 2004. While at work, O'Reilly received a call from a nursery saying his wife had failed to turn up to collect their youngest son. He then left a series of increasingly desperate messages on her mobile and home phones.
Are you Rach? Ring to see where you are. Give us a shout. Rach, this is Joe. I'm now really, really worried about you. Rach, this is not funny. This is not like you. Rach, it's me again. Please ring. I've been crying.
As well as calling Rachel, O'Reilly also contacted her mother, Rose, who immediately drove to the bungalow to find a scene of unimaginable horror.
Rachel was lying on the carpet face down, and her injuries were horrific.
Her head, all I could say, was just like a beetroot. It was unbelievable. You couldn't see her face. It was just red. She had been hit 8 times approximately with a blunt instrument, something maybe the length of 9 inches long and circular. She didn't stand a chance, like, you know.
Joe arrived and Rose remembers him kind of checking a pulse all right, and the thing that stuck out in her head was that he said to her, "Oh my God, Rachel, what have you done?"
The murder of a beautiful young mum in an idyllic village caused a media sensation. And to the surprise of officers at the scene, her husband seemed to welcome the spotlight.
I went out to introduce myself, and I shook hands with him, and I specifically said it to him. I remember well saying this: "Don't talk to the media about this case," I said, "because they will be asking you for comment and this, that, and the other. Keep away from the media." But he didn't take my advice. He didn't do what I asked him to do. He courted the media from day one.
O'Reilly's first TV appearance was alongside Rachel's parents. In this low-key lunchtime news interview, he put forward the theory of a burglary gone wrong.
We all, just discussions amongst ourselves, feel that she probably knew this person. The attack happened in the bedroom, and if it was just a random burglary, it was somebody she wouldn't know.
So if it was just a random burglary, we know he doesn't believe that he's offering it. But when he's saying it, we get a couple of interesting body language tells. One is an eye closure.
And if it was just a random burglary.
So this eye closure is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 9 frames, about a third of a second. And that's not a blink. So a blink is 1/20th of a second, just to lubricate the eyeball. When we close our eyes, we're distancing ourselves from the statement. So when we see an eye closure, what's often happening in parallel is a statement that the person doesn't want to be associated with. And then it follows on slightly at the end, the eyes open, and then we get this little head shake. No, it's tiny. But he's gesturing negation of this claim that it's a random burglary too. So when he uses the word random burglary, we know from this that he doesn't believe that, because he knows different.
If it was just a random burglary, it was somebody she wouldn't know, and after a few blows to the head, probably would recognise. But why kill her?
Wow. So he's talking about the attack, and he's telling the story, and the narrative is carrying on about what's happening, but he's reliving the moment. If we look at his hands, I can't find any other explanation for this gesture of smashing something into the floor or smashing something into someone else. So this illustration fits with an action, and you can almost see the growl on his face while he's doing it, of him reliving a moment where he was actually in the bedroom, he saw it happen, and he was doing the hitting. So we've got all these indicators clustering within about 5 seconds that make him prime suspect number 1.
There was some bruising on her arm, so I feel that she would have put up some kind of a fight. If there's bruising on her arm, that would signal to me that she was blocking whatever was hitting her head.
So the words he's using are blows, blocking, hitting, put up a fight. That's extremely graphic detail. for a grieving husband to be using at this point? And notice he's saying the blows that I saw.
The majority of the blows that I saw were to the back of the head and around the back of the ear.
Why is he talking about blows? And blows are things, they're actions. And why is he talking about seeing them instead of talking about injuries that he saw on Rachel after she's been attacked? Is it a verbal slip that puts him at the scene?
The majority of the blows that I saw were to the back of the head and around the back of the ear. And some on the top of the head. But again, it's my memories are quite fuzzy, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Oh my goodness. What we see here is a flash of fear.
But again, it's my memories are quite fuzzy, as I'm sure you can imagine.
So this is wide-eyed fear. The eyes are wide. It's a realisation of, I've just mentioned blows. I'm pretty sure, I'd put money on this, that he's now recognised he's put himself at the scene of crime. He's showing fear, he's feeling fear, and it's a quick correction by, my memory's quite fuzzy. Let's try and give some justification of why anything he says right now is not accurate.
My memories are quite fuzzy, as I'm sure you can imagine.
With a bit of a gasp at the end. So it looks calm on the surface, but when we see the wide-eyed fear, when we see the mistake of describing the blows, and we see the sigh of relief at the end, we know that he knows he's dropped himself in it here.
Even hardened detectives have been shocked by the ferocity of the attack on Rachel O'Reilly as she lay defenceless in her bedroom. The 30-year-old mother of two was found lying in a pool of blood at the house in Knoll yesterday afternoon.
Whoever murdered Rachel had tried to make it look like a botched burglary. By overturning furniture and taking a few valuables. But they hadn't tried hard enough.
It doesn't take a very experienced eye to see that this is very clearly a staged crime scene. So we are led to believe that this is a burglary that has gone wrong because a jewellery box has been taken. Well, the bedroom is at the back of the house, so this is the last room that a burglar would actually enter. There's nothing taken from any of the rooms at the front of the house, no valuables gone there. But the most telling thing about this crime scene is the way in which Rachel has been killed. So she has been battered by a heavy object and battered around the head. Why would a burglar do that? They just want to get out as quickly as possible, surely. This has got to be somebody who dislikes her because it's too personal, it's too brutal, it's too violent. It's not characteristic of a burglary that's gone wrong.
To the police, Joe O'Reilly had a seemingly watertight alibi. At 5:40 a.m, the 6'5" fitness fanatic had gone to a local gym. Then on to his office at a Dublin trading estate. A colleague confirmed they both left there at around 8:45 a.m, spending the rest of the morning at a bus depot where their company displayed advertising posters. But detectives still had concerns, especially as they learned more about the state of his and Rachel's marriage.
From what people have said, things had been unsettled for quite a while. There were a couple of friends that she confided in that there had been no physical intimacy between them for a long time. He had criticised her a lot. She felt that he didn't find her attractive. Joe was telling her that he was having to work very long hours in the office. He was staying away from home twice a week at least, claiming that he was sleeping in the office so he could get up and be there on time. Some friends kind of talked about how basically it seemed as though she was a single mum for all intents and purposes.
Hello, crime call.
But for the cameras, O'Reilly claimed it was a happy marriage. On Ireland's prime-time version of Crime Watch, He portrayed himself as a devastated husband, determined to help find his wife's killer.
On tonight's programme, we have a reconstruction of the last few hours before the terrible murder of Rachel O'Reilly in North County Dublin.
Unless something actually happens to you, you don't know how you're going to react in a particular situation, and people deal with shock and grief in different ways. And I kind of thought initially that maybe he was doing all this in an effort to do everything he humanly could to help find who had done this. And I kind of thought maybe I understood that. I thought maybe that was a good enough reason that he would be as giving and as accessible as he was being.
I've now got to try and raise 2 kids without a mother and one day try and explain to them why she's gone. So
first thing to notice, he doesn't refer to Rachel directly or refer to her as his wife here, but he does tell us that she's a mother, and he does use she. So he's signalling the relationship she has with their children, but he doesn't do the same with himself.
Nothing can change what's happened, but what we're hoping to do with this appeal is to raise awareness.
And then he uses a strategy that we see him use at other times as well. He starts to use a strategy of asking questions.
If you know this person, because somebody somewhere knows who this person is, and you gotta ask yourself a question: why are you protecting this person? Why are you, aware of the fact that there's 2 little boys now going to grow up without a mother? There's a mother and a father who had to bury their daughter. Why are you protecting this person?
So the idea that he's using a questioning structure is interesting in and of itself, but look at the references he makes. He talks about 2 little boys being without a mother.
Why are you, aware of the fact that there's 2 little boys now going to grow up without a mother?
He talks about a mother and father being without a daughter.
There's a mother and a father who had to bury their daughter.
But he doesn't talk about him as a husband being without his wife.
Why are you protecting this person?
So we have more evidence of him distancing himself from what he's saying, even at the point he's making the appeal for the person who's committed this crime to come forward.
If anyone on the 4th of October was acting suspiciously or looked weird.
So we've got this calm, relaxed speech about a traumatic murder of his wife. We've got him describing the perpetrator and whoever was involved. You'd expect that to bring some anger. So where's the anger? We don't see it. Maybe some sadness that the children have lost their mother. But the only emotion or expression we see is here right at the end, which is almost like an excitement when he mentions the violence and the blood.
If anyone on the 4th of October was acting suspiciously or looked weird or had blood on them, because there would have been blood on them.
So is he really turned on by the violence that makes him give this excited expression?
Had blood on them.
If that's the case, then this could suggest that he is a psychopath, because that's one of the characteristics of psychopathy. They take pleasure in someone else's harm, and we're seeing a strong indicator of that here. It's written all over his face.
O'Reilly's incredible performances weren't confined to his TV interviews. Police had sealed off the house he shared with Rachel following her murder. But once they'd swept it for clues, they allowed him to return.
Joe was given the option to have the house cleaned up, all the blood and everything gone. We were going to send in a forensic cleaning team to do it for him, free of charge. And he said no, he'll get some of the lads to clean it up. And it was a bizarre answer. So why did he want his wife's blood all over the place,
Joe was very adamant that Rachel's family and friends come see the house once he got the keys back. Joe offered to bring them down to the bedroom and show them where it had happened. And, I think they were all pretty clear about how visibly distressed they were at this, but it didn't stop him. He didn't have to do any of that. And he certainly didn't have to get down on one knee and start raising his hand over his head with an imaginary, weapon, showing them how he thought she had been killed.
Now, this is macabre, isn't it, and gruesome, and not the kind of conversation that you would think somebody traumatised would be having with anybody, let alone her parents.
Even when he was doing it, he was stepping over the body. He was actually going the physical movements as if she was there, standing over. Now, Rose was ready to vomit. She was sick, she couldn't believe it. Joe reenacting that, he was rubbing their noses in it,
It's very strange, and it's sadistic, and it gives away a bit of what I call guilty knowledge. So he says that he thinks that whoever killed her must have beaten her and then gone into the bathroom and washed their hands, but heard her gurgling and then come back to finish the job off. But how does he know that she might have been gurgling? How does he know that the killer has stopped and then gone back? The post-mortem shows actually that she was choking on her own blood, so she would have been making gurgling sounds. Only the killer could have possibly known that.
October 2004. Following a post-mortem, which showed she died of multiple skull fractures and inhalation of blood, Rachel was buried at Fingal Cemetery near Dublin. By then, police had examined her husband's phone history and found he'd made hundreds of calls to a female co-worker, often out of office hours.
Initially, when I interviewed Joe, he denied having an affair, but then they did break the news that he did have an affair, but it was over and it was all over. He didn't want his family to know. But then we spoke to the lady in question. She said, yeah, we are having an affair. So here's a guy who's telling lies.
Far from laying low after trying to mislead police, O'Reilly opted to raise his public profile further. In his next TV appearance, he even spoke to the killer directly.
I think Joe didn't not enjoy the attention. I think there was a part of him that was possibly, thinking, look at me and look how I'm manipulating the situation and look how people believe in me. And yeah, I think he thought he was being clever, for sure.
I always believe Joe is psychopathic. He has the tendencies there that these people have, and that they have an ego. They have a platform where they're at, that they know best. So he was trying to distance himself from being the bad guy. And look, I'm the victim here.
Rachel has 2 little boys who, along with her husband Joe, are struggling to deal with their loss. His message to the killer is clear.
Why? Why Rachel? Why then? What did she do, in your opinion, to deserve this?
So if we change the question, if we had it something like a rhetorical, what on earth do you think she did to deserve this? We're signalling that she didn't do anything to deserve this, because our language says that you can't come back to me, it's rhetorical, you can't come back to me with anything to tell me she deserved this. But he doesn't do that. He says, what did she do in your opinion to deserve this? Which allows for the possibility that he might have an opinion that actually Rachel did deserve it.
What did she do, in your opinion, to deserve this? Are you going to do it again? If you are, you need help.
Why, only if they do it again, they would need help? Why wouldn't they need help now, given they've already battered a woman to death?
If you are, you need help. What you've done is wrong. You've taken away a very young life for no good reason. I feel I know you because you had to kill her. You couldn't leave her alive to identify you. So it's a matter of time before you're found.
So now we have some of the truth seeping in. She did know a killer, and she had to die because, of course, she could identify the perpetrator.
Three weeks into the investigation, police had established that O'Reilly's extramarital affair had been going on for several months, that he'd introduced his girlfriend to his children, and that she'd even stayed at his house on a night when Rachel was away.
The police were able to get text messages and, the phone records that showed even on the morning that Rachel was killed, they had had 2 or 3 very long conversations and a series of texts to each other that morning. And that, in fact, they were involved in a very strong relationship. And, one that they expected would become a permanent thing.
The police decided to share their suspicions about O'Reilly with Rachel's mother, Rose. But not only did he insist he was innocent, he persuaded her to join him for his biggest TV appearance yet, before a live studio audience on Ireland's premiere evening talk programme.
With me tonight, Rachel's husband Joe and her mother Rose. You're very welcome.
The Late Late Show is kind of like a bit of an institution. Huge viewership figures. It is the most watched show in the country. So they went on The Late Late Show, and it has become, it's kind of gone down as kind of one of those seminal TV moments, because you could just tell that there was a tension there that wasn't too difficult to interpret. Whenever Joe spoke, Joe was being kind of like almost jokey.
You proposed to her where?
In Paris, up the Eiffel Tower. So it was either propose or she'd throw me off. So.
All right.
This kind of stuff, he wasn't getting any reaction from Rose. She was angry.
It only takes a second of looking at this couple together to realise that there's a very strange dynamic here. She looks almost frozen. She looks like she's experiencing revulsion, probably mixed with cold fury. So it's clear, isn't it, what her suspicions are?
And you're married and you have the 2 boys. Yeah. Everything was going on great. I mean, making plans for the future, little things you had.
Yeah, I mean, just carrying on. Life is normal. The last thing we expected was what happened.
So in this small clip, we have some disfluences. We have a single-sided shoulder shrug, and we have a little head shake no, which accompany the word that this is the last thing that we expected. So that's enough to tell us this is a lie.
Just carrying on. Life is normal. The last thing we expected was what happened.
Because the little gestural head shake no is negating the statement that this is the last thing we expected. And when we see the shoulder lift, especially just on one side by about 1 centimetre, this is a partial or fragment of the full gesture of I've no conviction to the words I'm using here. I'm not connected to what I'm saying. I'm not confident in the words I'm using. And then we get the disfluences and the stuttering.
The last thing we expected was what happened.
You had plans for a birth.
So that's the golden triad, which happened within a few seconds with the words, this is not what I expected. That's a lie.
Then as you hear, out-of-body experience.
During the interview, O'Reilly was asked to recall the moment he arrived at the house and being told by Rachel's best friend, Jackie Connor, that she was dead.
There was a box near where Rachel was lying. There was blood on that, so I moved that to try and again move Rachel. And then I remember Jackie arriving on the scene, who's a nurse. Jackie and I then tried moving Rach, but Jackie just, checked knew where to look properly, I guess, for pulses and that, and said that she's gone, she's dead, what happened? And I said, then I think she fell.
So when he said, I think she fell, we get this little micro head shake, no, that coincides with the words, I think she fell. No, you didn't, because your body is telling us the opposite.
I said, then I think she fell.
And then we also get this gesture of anger, disgust, which seems to be connected to any time he describes the event in that bedroom. And those flashbacks or the reliving of the event he's not able to suppress that. Now, he probably doesn't know he's showing the anger, disgust that he felt at the time of the crime, but from the outside, it's so clear and so obvious, and there's no other explanation for it.
She was an absolutely brilliant daughter, a brilliant person, and it's just inconceivable that, you know, her life has ended and the way it did. She didn't deserve that, and it should never have been.
I mean, did she have any possible enemies? Is there anyone that she'd ever had a falling out with?
So, did she have any possible enemies? What's happening is subconsciously she's connecting the murder and the enemies with the person sat on her left.
I mean, did she have any possible enemies?
She's not pointed the finger at Joe O'Reilly so far in the 3 weeks, but she's pointed her eyes, and the expressions on her face tell us that she's picking up and has got high suspicion that Joe O'Reilly was the perpetrator, and her face is telling us that.
Well, I would appeal to anybody.
Towards the end of the appearance, Rose delivered an emotional public plea.
She makes an appeal that people come forward, even if it's just to give any bit of evidence. She also goes on to say she wants to stop others from suffering, and if the perpetrator's out there, they might strike again. We need to stop this from happening to someone else.
And we feel that that person or persons are out there, and they could do the very same again and put families like ours, grandmother, uncles, aunts, cousins, Joe's family, all their cousins and everything. It's just absolute hell.
So all of those things feed into an extremely credible appeal.
And we feel there won't be any closure until, you know, something comes, you know, there's some break made.
And at that point, Joe O'Reilly gives another appeal. Now, Rose clearly's already given it. And yet he thinks it's relevant to start mentioning blood several times and mentioning where this blood might be on the perpetrator.
There was a lot of blood, so therefore there would have been a lot of blood on this person, whether it was in their hair, and on their face, on their hands, on their clothes, somewhere. If they got into a car, there would have to be blood stains in the car somewhere.
This is one example of many where Joe O'Reilly seems to go somewhere else when he gives information, and he seems to want to give information that is very graphic, and it relates to the violence of the act itself.
I think everybody in the audience was feeling uneasy, and so it was a real turning point in terms of how the press started to report the killing and how people around him started to view him. So if this was a PR stunt, it was one that backfired massively, massively. This is somebody who doesn't know when to just shut their heck up.
As well as bringing suspicion upon himself in the studio, O'Reilly had also raised eyebrows with his behaviour backstage.
We took all statements from the RTE staff on that in respect of that night, and they told me he was in the green room at the back waiting to go out, and part of the process there's tea and sandwiches and crisps and everything given to the people, the guests, before they go out, like, you know, to relax them and that. And Rachel's family wouldn't even have a cup of tea, they were that nervous. And Joe drank all the tea, scoffed all the sandwiches, ate all the crisps, and was on his phone the whole time. And this was not normal behaviour for someone that's lost their wife and has gone out to appeal, like, you know. He wasn't the grieving husband. He didn't come across as the grieving husband.
Six weeks into the investigation, detectives had eliminated all suspects apart from O'Reilly. They'd also established that shortly before her murder, Rachel had found out about his affair. On November the 17th, officers arrested him at his home. But after nearly 12 hours of questioning, they had to let him go.
In many ways, he did commit the perfect murder, or one that he certainly could have got away with. There was no murder weapon. There were no witnesses. And there was nothing really that could have fingered him as such, because it was circumstantial.
March 2005, and nearly 6 months after the murder, a potential breakthrough. A meeting with relatives yielded new information about events at Rachel's funeral.
O'Reilly had, along with other family members, put a note into Rachel's coffin, but it was sealed in an envelope and nobody knew what was written on it. So Rachel's body was exhumed, and it turns out that this was actually quite a long letter, and within it he says, "Rachel, forgive me." 2 words, 1 sentence. It's not quite a confession, but bearing in mind all of the other suspicions around his behaviour, it's very, very interesting. So does he mean forgive me because our marriage went awry? Does he mean forgive me, I wasn't able to protect you? Does he mean forgive me because, of course, he is the perpetrator?
Tell me a little bit about Rachel, Joe. What sort of a woman was she?
Just a normal woman. She did extraordinary things in her short life, great sporting achievements, mother of 2 small children. Just, you know, nothing out of the ordinary, no lifestyle, which is famous, just a normal person.
How did you two meet?
The tender words Joe O'Reilly reserved for his wife after her death were in stark contrast to those he used when she was alive. As he continued to play a mourning husband in public, detectives were not only studying the letter he'd placed in Rachel's coffin, but private emails he'd written just 4 months before her murder.
The police were able to establish, after looking at his laptop, that he had an intense hatred, really, towards her. That's the only way to kind of describe it, because the way that he spoke about her in emails to his own sister were just extraordinarily cruel.
He referred to her terrible language. He called her a cunt. He called her useless. You know, he gave the distinct impression she wasn't a good mother, and, you know, but that was far from the truth.
There was a line in one of them about how he said, you know, I'm aware I'm possibly overcritical of her at sometimes, but, you know, to be honest, I don't really care because she repulses me.
But it became quite clear that he hated Rachel. It's quite obvious from the emails that he wanted Rachel gone. He even had it in one of his emails: marriage plus Rachel plus me equals over.
They're really shocking in terms of the venom that he expresses for Rachel. This is somebody who is really brewing a seething, nasty, virulent, despising, I think, is the best word to put it, of his wife.
We should pay attention to the power of words, and we should think about the word choices that we make, because if we're constantly putting someone down using derogatory terms, it becomes easy to then do nasty things to people because of how we're referring to them. So by this point, what we're doing is we're turning Rachel from being a whole human being to being one body part, and we're dissing that body part. That's what fat ass means. So we're saying something negative about her. We're turning into her body part rather than a whole human. And then we're completely dehumanizing her by saying we then kick it, the fat ass that she's become, into the middle of next week. All of his language choices suggest he really did detest Rachel. At which point you think, if these have gone before Rachel's brutally murdered, he had opportunity to leave. He had opportunity to go because he knew he despised her. He knew he didn't want to be with her. Me plus Rachel plus marriage is over. So why didn't he just leave the marriage?
The answer to that question was also on the laptop. When looking into the possibility of a divorce, O'Reilly learned he'd almost certainly lose permanent access to their 2 children.
He was very conscious that he didn't want to be a weekend custody dad. And it had been made quite clear to him that in this country, Ireland, that he would have very little rights as a father if they eventually did split up.
The prospect of losing custody was one O'Reilly refused to accept. But when Rachel finally confronted him about his affair on October the 3rd, 2004, it suddenly became real.
We discovered the night before she was killed, she had a blazing row with Joe, and there was an ultimatum given for him to clean up his act or else. And he knew that, you know, he was gone if he didn't clean up his act, and I guess that's what spurred him on then to carry out his fantasy to kill his wife and get away with it.
For 2 years, O'Reilly managed to escape justice, but then his alibi unraveled. The work colleague who'd been with him on the day of the murder gave further details about their movements that morning. He said O'Reilly had left their company HQ for the bus depot 15 minutes before him, and that when he arrived at the depot, he didn't actually see O'Reilly in person for another hour and a half. So where was he during that time? As he'd been using his phone almost constantly, detectives were about to find out.
Initially, we were told that there's a new system of cell site analysis that could be done on phones. So we sat down with the engineers and we said we need a minute by minute. And they did that.
O'Reilly's mobile had effectively acted as a tracking device, and police could now pinpoint where he was every time he used it. At 9:25, approximately the time Rachel was murdered, he took a call from a work colleague. He told police he was at the bus depot at the time, but the masked evidence proved otherwise.
That phone call came through Murphy's Quarry, and there are 4 aerials on a mast. And one of the masts was pointing right down towards Joe Riley's house. And that call came through that particular aerial. So, you know, anyone logical thinking, well, Jesse must have been down in the house, like.
At last, detectives now had the full picture. O'Reilly had driven home from work to kill his wife after she'd dropped their children off at their nursery. He then sped back to his office, where he made a series of calls designed to cover his tracks.
Rach, this is Joe. I'm now really worried about you. Rach, this is not funny. This is not like you. Rach, it's me again. Please ring. I've been crying.
In the midst of those calls, O'Reilly also phoned Rachel's mother, ensuring it was she who went to the house to find the battered body.
Contriving to allow an elderly woman to walk in and see her daughter in that state, it's so cruel. But I think that he did it because it looks like he's been out of the house. That stacks up with his alibi. But he also wants to make sure that he's got an audience for when he goes in and he discovers that Rachel is dead. You know, what a terrible thing to put a woman through. It's not bad enough that you've taken her daughter's life, but now you're going to put
expectation that he will be out in the next few years, which is hugely distressing for Rachel's family. They have to go back and make the case each time for why he should stay where he is. Each time they have to write new letters about, like, revisit the trauma, revisit all of those details, revisit the reasons why they believe he should stay behind bars. It's kind of a cruel system.
In 2010, Rachel's parents replaced the headstone on her grave. It now bears her maiden name of Callaley, rather than her married name of O'Reilly. There's no forgetting their daughter's life, or the brutal, lying husband responsible for her death.
It was an incredibly angry, vicious assault on Rachel. So I think that this offence is really defined by brutality, but the lack of empathy for her family, bearing in mind that you've taken their child, it was nothing short of cruel. He put them through far more than even you can imagine. It's sadistic. It really is sadistic.